placing that on the end, and we're going to secure that feather strip down with a couple of light taps. The critical thing about having the rail covered correctly and smoothly is getting the stretch of this cloth running the length of the rail. That will make the stapling of the rail much easier. The harder and longer and tighter you can stretch this, the easier it'll be. So as we proceed across the rail, I'm going to be using my right hand, and I'm going to be stretching this cloth all along the way. I'm also going to use my hand to adjust the rollover of the cloth on the back side. That will just save me some excess trimming as we proceed and wrap the cloth around this rail. So as I go, I'm going to be dragging this along, adjusting my gap. You can see I'm putting a lot of tension on the rail. When I get to the end, I even can put more tension on the cloth, come all the way out the end. You can see there's a lot of tension on this cloth. It's under a lot of stress, and that's what we want. Then I go back and I'm going to secure the feather strip to make sure it holds the cloth in place for me. Once that's completed, now I'm going to do some trimming. Right on the end of the rail, I'm going to cut this little tiny piece of cloth so that when the cloth is rolled over, it will fold underneath nicely. Do that on both ends. Then I'm going to trim some of this excess cloth that I have that's lipped over. Be very careful when trimming. When you trim this way, you don't want to jump the feather strip and cut your cloth. So it's always best to trim so that the blade is straight down and thereby protecting the finish of your rail. Once that's trimmed off again, I want to ensure that my feather strip is down and secured. From this point, roll the cloth over so that the top side is revealed and continue and roll the rail over. And now we'll begin the stapling process. When you start with the rails, stapling, you start on the ends. The most difficult part of the staple is to get the cloth to make this turn. So we're going to start here so that we can use the slack that we're going to need from the cloth in order to achieve that. We're going to pull the cloth with some pressure, and we're going to roll it straight up and apply 2 staples up very high. And that's basically going to hold the tension for us so that then we can begin to work the cloth around the corner. As we work it, we're going to create a little bit of a pucker on top and place a staple within this stapling groove. You'll notice here that we have a stapling groove that's routed into the bottom of the rail. This area is designed to lay the cloth over, provide a staple, and once trimmed, be exactly flush with the bottom of the rail. It's very critical that the rail, when setting on the slate, be a correct height. And this staple groove allows us to secure this cloth and achieve that. When the staple is placed, as we make this turn, the angle of the staple is done so that we can do what's called stacking. When you put the staple straight, or if you put the staples across the groove, you're not going to be able to apply as many staples as necessary in order to correctly make the cloth bend this corner. You're also not going to be able to have the cloth look clean coming around the corner, as you'll see here in a minute when I make this turn. You can see here that I've made this turn now with the cloth that's all puckered and the staple stacked very nicely, all within the stapling groove. That's correctly done. Once we've got both ends done, now you can see that the tension on this cloth, it pretty much lays in the place that we need it to be. So then you can come back, either left or right, put a little bit of tension but not too much. If you pull too hard on the cloth, what will happen is you'll create a dimple in the cushion. This is the cushion down here at the bottom of the rail. If you pull this too hard and create a dimple, it's just not going to allow the table to play correctly. So you want to pull it stiffly and somewhat hard, but not too soft to create a pucker in the cloth. Placing the staples about 2 inches apart is all that's needed. They don't need to be right next to each other because the length of this cloth and the stretch and the length allows no puckers to exist, as you can see. Okay, once we have all our staples placed, we're going to take the cloth and we're going to complete the ends. You can see here on the end, the cloth is already, because of the split that we made, it's already practically laying where we need it to. We're just going to continue to fold this down underneath, and then we're going to lay the cloth back. The correct way to do this is to lay the cloth back at an angle tapering down, because when the pocket fits onto the table, if the cloth were, for example, too high, When the pocket would lay on this, you would see this section of cloth. So you want to make sure that's rolled down and pulled back so that it's out of the way, yet covers the end of the rail correctly. So once that's on there, we're going to carefully place a staple across the end. Then we're going to take this little pucker right here, we're going to pull that down, place another staple there. Now we simply take a sharp, fresh knife and we just trim this very carefully. Trim this very carefully right around the edge. Again, I like to do it on both ends. Then once we have that trimmed, we take the blade and I stick it right on the edge of that stapling groove and just follow and trace that all the way back. That cloth is trimmed. Finally, turn the rail back over, and again, taking your mallet, carefully you want to then adjust this feather strip. So you want to hit this feather strip down, not too hard. Feel as you go along the way so that if there's any high spots, you can adjust them. Ideally, the cloth needs to be above the surface of the rail. And the reason that is so that when a cue is draped across of the cushion, it won't be rubbing against the finished wood itself. So the cloth should be slightly higher, and the feather strip should be slightly higher than the surface of the rail. Once that's achieved, you can see the completed product is one completely covered rail. Now that we've completed an end rail, I'm going to demonstrate doing a side rail. The only difference between an end rail and a side rail is that the side rails are obviously, there's a side pocket that's bolted to them. So one end of the cushion is much flatter. Because it's a side pocket, obviously you don't have to make that corner transition. We're going to do what's called a fold. But the beginning process of that is just about like that other corner. In other words, you're pulling off of the rail to provide stretch on that cloth. Instead of rolling straight up like this and having a pucker that you can't get rid of, you pull straight out and roll it over, coming straight off the rail, so that you leave a sleeve coming off the end. Now the center of the rail is just like it was before. Apply staples about every 2 inches. Now the difference here in the side pocket, as I said, we're going to do a fold. So what you do here is you have the top of the rail here and the bottom sleeve here. We're going to take the bottom sleeve, place it down following the contour of the bottom of the cushion, and then fold the top over it. Now you can see here that we can adjust this by rolling this cloth either in or out. We can roll it, keeping tension on it, so that we get this seam following exactly the contour of the bottom of the cushion, and then place a staple in the bottom of the rail. Because you have a little bit of a pucker here, we're going to gather that together and put a pucker down there, placing another staple in. Now, just like the corner pocket, keep the natural fold of the cloth angled down, place a staple near the end. Then resume the other side just like the other corner pocket. When you trim exactly the same way. Just trim off the excess cloth. Even though you get quite a gather of cloth right here, that's not a big concern because this part of the rail will be extended out over the pocket opening on the slate. It will not be resting on the slate, so don't be concerned about that. Finished by adjusting your feather strip on the top. The final assembly of this table is to take the rails, and we're going to assemble the pockets on the rails, I should say, and then be able to turn the whole thing over and insert it on the table. We do this in a method called a horseshoe, and by that means that you're going to be assembling 3 of the rails, 1 end rail and 2 side rails with the corner pockets, and then turn that assembly over and put that on half the table, assemble the horseshoe on the other side, and then install that on the table. You never want to install all the pockets with all the hardware and turn the whole thing over. It's simply too large and you'll break it. So the horseshoe method is the best way in order to assemble as much of the rails as you can without causing any damage. At this point, we're going to take the pocket shank and insert it into the hole that's at the end of the rail. Make sure that the shield is tucked in, and then you'll see the hole at the bottom of the rail, and use the provided hardware and just insert the pocket bolt. Thank you. You don't need a lot of pressure. You can use a hand tool and just tighten it firmly. right, Chris, let's turn this over, put it on this end. We're going to flip this side up. Go back your way. Here, I'll hand this to you.
Going backwards.
Now, whenever you lay one side on, before the other side is on, as a safety, use one of the rail bolts and insert it in the bottom of the rail. When using the rail bolts and washers, you take that furniture washer like we discussed earlier, you place it on the bolt, and that goes into the rail bolt hole to secure the rail up underneath. And the reason you want to apply that is so that if this section of rail is ever bumped or anything during the rest of the installation, it doesn't fall off and anything break. Now it's just a matter of taking all these rail bolts, finding the holes underneath, and inserting all the bolts. Tightening the rails is important because of the adjustment and to make sure everything is proportioned and squared for the action of the ball. You begin by centering the end rail. All the rail bolts are in at this point, but they're only hand tight. So that gives us some ability to adjust some things. We're going to center the rail on the end, and then we're going to make sure that we're pressed forward. Once we center it and press forward, we're just going to go ahead and tighten this end rail. Start with the end bolt. Again, you'll notice I don't like using power tools on this part because we want the rails tight, and we don't want to use a power tool that's going to vibrate any of the table or over tighten it and cause any damage. Once the end rails are tight, there's a procedure to tightening the side. You have to be very careful about how the side rail is straightened because the ball is going to, in the course of playing, the ball will have to run the length of that rail. So we do this with our eye. It's the best method in order to achieve a straight rail. You start by taking the ends of the rail and you press inward to tighten up that end, that corner pocket, and then tighten both ends. Go ahead and do that side, Chris. Once those corners are tight, then Chris is going to go into the middle and he's going to tighten the center bolts according to the adjustment that we provide. Okay, pull the other one back. Right there. Tap it in just a hair. Okay, tighten it. Once all the rails are tightened down, everything's adjusted and straight, the final step is applying the screws that are provided by Legacy in the pocket box. We're going to use these screws and screw up the tabs into the back of the slate underneath in all the pockets. So we'll lay on our back and we'll use a screw gun for that, and we'll get all the pockets attached, all the pocket tabs. All right, putting these pocket tabs in with these screws is very easy. On the side pockets and the corner pockets alike, you just want to make sure that the tabs are spread apart as far as they can be without tearing any of the leather. Make sure the basket is opened up so that it can receive the balls very easily. The holes are already even provided for you, so you just start one of the screws. Take your screw gun here and just simply screw that into the backing of the slate. So once the pockets are stapled, the final step is to place the spot on the table so that we know where to rack the balls. That's very simple. You take a tape measure and you lay the tape against the cushion directly in line with the second sight up on the side rail. Lay the tape across on the other side. The measurement will be 44 inches from inside cushion to cushion. We go at exactly 22 directly under the tape, and that's where we place the spot. Once the spot is down, the table is essentially finished. What we're going to do now, though, before we leave, is we're going to do a final leveling check because some of the table will have settled. So we're going to check the level around the table, and then we're going to take a ball and just make sure that all the rails are tight and bounce it off the rails and make sure it plays correctly. So checking the level is easy. We just take our level after we've cleaned it and got the slate dust off, and we see some things. And it looks like this leg is settled just a little bit, Chris, so I'm going to have you put a couple of shims under there just so we can make that final adjustment. Be very careful when you lift the table. You can do it from the side, and you just use your legs carefully and just take a little bit of weight off. That looks perfect. After that leveling, then we just take and we check the balls, check the response on the rails. Table looks good.